Well, Brian McLaren, welcome back to the Liminal Living podcast. It's great to see you on my screen today. How are you?
I'm was doing well before, but even better now that we're getting a chance to talk. So
All
looking forward
right.
to this.
Now, I don't know if you remember, but I stood you up last month. You-
These
there-
these things happen. These things happen.
I got a text from a number I didn't have and said, "Hey, this is Brian McLaren. I'm on the Riverside platform and nobody's here." And I thought, "Oh God, I
No
can't believe I
worries.
stood up Brian McLaren." But you were full of grace, and I appreciate it so much.
Well, look at it this way. I have made this sort of mistake myself, so you made me feel better. So you
All
did me
right.
a favor.
I did you a favor by standing you up. See,
That's right.
full of grace. Yeah, that's the things I want to be. Well, you have written a new piece of fiction. I got it right here, The Last Voyage. And
Yes.
this is the first in a trilogy, and we're going to be talking a little bit about it without giving away any spoilers. But before we dive into, I guess, some of the topics that are there, things tend to be a little serious and solemn these days. I think I utter a lot more expletives when I'm reading the news than I normally do. So, what is something that has recently made you laugh out loud?
Oh my goodness. So there have been many. I've had many joyful moments this summer. But I got a text from my grandson yesterday, and I'm an avid fly fisherman, and he's becoming a fisherman, a very good fisherman in his own 10-year-old or 11-year-old self, and he sent me a picture yesterday of him with a nice big largemouth bass that he caught. And behind him was the most beautiful cloud formation in the glory of sunset. And I just thought nobody could have taken a better promotion shot of a person fishing than he had taken just by chance when he was at the riverside the other day. So that was a happy moment.
Oh, that's great. I'm finding that if I look at the long term of how things are shaping out, I get depressed. But if I look at the now and the here and what's in front of me, I can find joy in the moment. Do you find that to be also true?
I this time of year where it's so hot and humid here in Florida, I don't take a walk every single morning, but most of the year I get out for an early morning walk. And often I'll be walking along, listening to the birds or watching them fly. And I'll just say to myself, humans are a mess, but the birds are being awesome.
Yes, that is true. I'm a spiritual director, and I've kind of walked with some people who are, experiencing some disruption in their faith and life, and they look at things and their ideas, their concepts about God, and they don't stand up anymore to what they're experiencing, and they just don't know what's true anymore. And I'll say, well, what's around you right now? And they'll start describing their surroundings. Oh, there's a tree over here. I say, well, that tree is true. And they're like, what does that even mean? It's like, it's hard to get out of our ideas
Yes.
into here and now.
I just did a podcast this morning with some folks who are really involved in AI and very interested in the intersections of AI and theology and so on. And I just keep thinking, whatever powers for good and evil AI has, and I'm sure it has a lot in both directions, it still keeps taking us away from the truth of a tree or the truth of a stream or the truth of a planet spinning around its axis and orbiting around the sun. So we need those reminders. That's good spiritual direction, I think, to get people paying attention to the trees.
Yeah, I think I cannot remember the name of the poet, but he called it the inscape of the objects. Do you remember who might have said that?
Gerard Manley Hopkins. Yeah.
Yes, the world is charged with the grandeur of God.
Yes, that's it. That's it.
The inscape. Instead of the landscape, he called it the inscape, of the thing that makes the tree its own.
That's such a great phrase. Such a great phrase. I do. And I think you're right. Maybe that should be a project you take on.
Oh, possibly. Every time I think I have a book project nailed down, then I say, well, I can't just talk about that. I'll talk about this and this and this, and then it falls apart. So one day I'll get there. Well, you have been expanding your horizons a little bit. You started writing fiction, and I didn't see that coming
Mm.
because I've been reading you for a long time. At first, I wasn't allowed to read you because you're a heretic, and then I realized, wow, this guy has been making a lot of sense for a long time. There's a lot of wisdom here, and then all of a sudden, you write fiction, and I just didn't see that coming. But I'm also noticing this seems to be a trend that people are starting to move into fiction when they've been writing nonfiction for a while. When did you realize that this book was becoming a concept within you?
Yeah. So a little bit of background before that. I had 25 years ago, I had a book come out 24 years ago called A New Kind of Christian that I began writing as nonfiction. And then halfway through, I
Really?
shifted and started again, actually. And it became a fictional trilogy. So,
I did not know.
yeah, a lot of people who came across me after that didn't know that, but a lot of people came across my work originally in that context. This is a little more, this is a lot more character driven, and this is in the sci-fi genre, and also maybe the cli-fi or climate fiction, in that it's dealing with the world and the aftermath of climate change and all the rest. Actually, in 2016, right after the US elections, literally the next day, I opened a file on my computer and called it The Last Voyage. And I didn't have any idea what it would be about, where it would go, but I just had this urge to write some fiction. And I wanted to write about a voyage to Mars that was morally and ethically fraught.
Hmm.
And I think the other thing that drove me that morning was realizing that my country had elected an oligarch. They had decided to choose someone who already had great power because of their wealth. And I thought, and I think the question in my mind is, where will this lead if we now, in a sense, don't have any checks and balances between the wealthy and the politically powerful, but now they become the same community? Where will that lead? And it felt like fiction was a good way to explore that.
I think so. I was wondering that I know a lot of authors are moving from the nonfiction to the fiction realm. Do you think that we're possibly butting up against the limitation of ideas in our information age, like post-truth society, and now the best vehicle is story?
Well, I think for a lot of things, story has always been the best vehicle, and maybe we're sort of returning to that deeper insight. The issue of truth and post-truth and all that, I think, intensifies when people. Well, let me say two things. First, we have to agree that our non-fictional world is stranger than fiction. Like, nobody ever could have written a script of what's going on in the world right now,
Hmm.
and nobody would have believed it if we did. So that first jolts things a bit. But I think a lot of our struggle is, just as you say, we're running out of ideas in this way. All of our ideas have been so shaped by the categories of modernity: colonialism, capitalism, Marxism, and socialism, and communism, and capitalism, all of which are based on very similar assumptions, namely that human economics is the primary driver of history. So many of the frameworks of both Enlightenment, rationalism, and even Christian orthodoxy, they've created the world we're in, and when the world we're in doesn't seem to be working, we have. It's been so long since we've had to have creative thinking
Yeah, yeah.
outside of those categories, and so imagination becomes super, super important in times like this. I often quote the European philosopher Slavoj Žižek, who said it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism,
Wow.
which I think explains a lot of our apocalyptic literature. And Bayo Akamalafi, the African philosopher, who says, what if our response to the problem is an expression of the problem? And in other words, if the mind that is so shaped by a set of problems, that mind can't even generate solutions that aren't part of the problem. And so both of those quotes, it seems to me, argue for this need for something imaginative. And I think this would attract a lot of people to move out of the mode, sort of the left brain mode of analysis, and more into the right brain mode of imagination.
Yeah, I think whoever captures the imagination of the people then gets to direct the ethic and the behavior of that people, which is the propaganda. The term propaganda is the narratives that then shape the imagination of the people that then get the outcomes from them they want. Yeah. Well, I'm studying Colossians right now using Brian Walsh's book. Colossians Remixed.
Yes.
Wow.
What a great book. I mean, not only is the book a brilliant analysis of Colossians, but it also is a brilliant demonstration of different theological methods. Oh, it's such a great book.
It is like blowing up my mind right now. And because it's so applicable today, because he's talking about it as a manifesto for, against the empire that demands our worship and conformity.
Yes.
And he talks about that propaganda as the way that shapes the imagination of the people. And what's really interesting is that modern religious folks seem to be obsessed with controlling moral behaviors of the masses. Project 2025 and all the way back to the moral majority from the 80s, and you can take it farther back if you want. I was wondering, maybe this is why religious folks cozy up to dictators who promise to share a piece of the power pie with them.
I think that's so true. And there's such a long history of it in the Christian faith, but there's a long history of it in many different religious traditions. Yeah.
I don't think it's a modern day. I mean, it is a modern day problem, but that's not when it was invented.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Well, how might Christians emphasize ethics without feeding the fascist beast of controlling the masses?
Well, one of the responses that comes to mind to that excellent question for me is to make a distinction between three kinds of social organization, what we might call communities. And these would be, I love Wendell Berry's definition of a community. It's a group of families who are linked, families and individuals who are linked together by their mutual dependence on the same environment. To me, that's a super provocative understanding of a community.
Yeah.
I should say the word community itself, a lot of people think it's based on the word unity. The truth is it's based on the word munity with an M, meaning munitions. And community meant a group of people who are bound together by their common dependence on the same weapons, on the same stash of weapons.
Did not know that.
But I like Wendell Berry's definition better. I like
that one too.
I think that munitions etymology tells us how it has been, and I think Wendell Berry, how it has been on a social level, but I think Wendell Berry's talking about a deeper ecological level.
Yeah.
I think I was going to refer to somebody else as well, but I lost that train of thought. Sorry about that.
That's okay. But that emphasizing ethics without feeding the beast of control.
Yes. And what I love about Wendell Berry's definition is that if a community is people who depend on the same environment and they're mutually interdependent with one another, a set of ethics arises out of their very concrete life situation. We have to take care of the land, because if we don't take care of the land, it won't be able to take care of us. And we have to take care of each other because we're mutually dependent on each other and the environment. And that creates a set of ethics that really, really makes sense. There has to be mutuality. There has to be balance. But when we allow some other framework to create our ethics, then we can end up with crazy ethics, like what we've been hearing in recent months, both from people who are supposed to be Christians and people who make no pretense of being Christians. For example, that empathy is toxic, that empathy is a bad thing. I think what they mean is empathy for your friend is good. Empathy for your enemy is evil, which it seems to me Jesus had something to say about in the Sermon on the Mount.
I do recall that, yes.
But if nationalism, and of course this anti-empathy rhetoric comes within the framework of Christian nationalism, if nationalism is your framework, not a group of individuals bound together by mutual dependence on one another and their environment, but a group of people bound together by their dependence on the same weapons, then you can see how empathy would be toxic and how that would create a very, very different ethic. I also think capitalism plays a big role in this, because capitalism tells us that economic exchanges have no personal or moral obligation apart from what a state dictates. And even that's under question now, because the idea is let the market solve everything. And we don't even need the state to intervene in economic affairs. So, and we see right now the dismantling of the state, because I think the idea is when you put captains of the market in charge of everything, they would like to get rid of the state. They would like to let the market solve everything because that'll be more profit for them.
Yes. Yeah, I can see that. I like how ethics arise out of a place and a people, and not like growing up reading Colossians. We're about to do Colossians 3 this week, and my worship director was like, it's a doozy. He's got a list of all the stuff you're not allowed to do. And it seems like the way that I understood that previously was moral absolutes that are non-negotiable for Christians, that come down from above.
Yes.
But what you just explained was an ethic that rose up from a people in a place. I like that.
In fact, I wrote about this in my previous book called Life After Doom. If folks are interested, there are 2 chapters where I talk about reading the Bible as indigenous literature. And there it is. And one way that actually in the writing of that book, here I was a pastor for many years. I've been teaching the Bible for decades and decades. But I feel like I came to a new understanding of how the Bible works. And one way to say it is this: the Bible is the literature of an indigenous people, a tribal people who were called the Israelites or the Jews. They were a group of tribes tied to their land. And like many indigenous people, they experienced colonization by a succession of invaders. Colonization by the Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, later the Greeks, I guess the Syrians, and then the Romans. And as indigenous people, they had developed these bottom-up ethical norms. Now, they said they came from God, but they also, we might say, came from the earth. They came from God in a time when they were deeply dependent on the earth and each other. And they make perfect sense in that way. That's why you see for example, in the book of Leviticus, so many laws about taking care of the land, right? This is part of your life. And then the Romans and the other invaders come along as colonizers, and they have a different set of values. And they're trying to impose that set of values on these people. And in that way, when they're calling people back to these primal values, they're saying these values are more fundamental, they're more primal, they're more original, they're more divine. So Colossians would be Paul, who's become a follower of Jesus, who's an indigenous Jewish prophet, who's calling people back to those essential values. which, by the way, many of them can best be conveyed not through a set of rules, but through a set of stories about a father whose son runs away, or a farmer whose ox falls into a pit, and those stories evoke ethics. So yeah, I think this is a very fertile discussion, and the Book of Colossians is a great example of it. Sorry to ramble on, but one other thing, as I was thinking about this, you remember in the Hebrew Scriptures it says an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and for us that sounds barbarian. But if you were to say this, no, this was in the indigenous world. You live in a world of reciprocity. What you do to others will be done to you. And that's a way of saying we're all interwoven, and your neighbor has the same rights you do. And there's this sense of balance. And I'm not saying that's the best way to organize law today, but you can see the logic of it. The empire comes in, and they're like, don't you ever dare hurt a Roman citizen. If you hurt a Roman citizen, we'll kill 100 of your worthless indigenous people, right? It's that kind of retaliation. And so in that way, I think you can see the call that's a call to a more humane way of life than the dominating colonizing.
It seems like eye for an eye would be progress for us at this point.
Well, yeah, especially you look, we're watching it play out in Israel in a tragic way. 3,500 Israelis were tragically, indefensibly killed by Hamas. But then now, how many tens or hundreds of times or thousands of times of people will be killed in retaliation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if we invoked eye for an eye, then it would disrupt the hierarchy system that we did have right currently, because we were parking me and my son were parking, and it says, if you are parked here for over this amount of time, you will owe this fine. And I said, that's how much it costs for a rich person to park here. And he just went, what? I was like, it's different.
Yeah, that's well said. By the way, I don't think I should mention Israel and Palestine without also mentioning, for example, the United States had an attack in 2001, and we did the same thing. How many literally hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives as what was seen by most Americans as a defensible, in fact, maybe even a morally required response, right? Mm-hmm. So these are different moralities. And this brings us back to the issue of what happens when our moral imagination is so cramped and stunted that we can't even imagine better ways of organizing our.
Yes. And that's, I have friends who are very conservative, and they voted that direction this last time around, and they're Christians, and it's really hard to have conversations with them sometimes because their imagination is so captured by all of the social wars topics that are used, that I think that falls into the category of the propaganda, because it captures their imagination, and then it says, you align yourself with us, we will do these things for you.
Yes. And
since the Bible in modern times has not been recontextualized, but we're still living in the medieval theologies that we've held, they don't have an imagination to get outside of that, to get perspective and then critique it. It is a allegiance that they cannot question. It's hard.
Yes.
Yeah. It seems as though the message of progressive Christianity, progressivism, is not very popular, despite what conservatives might think, that everything is swayed for that. Why might it be that progressivism is not so popular? And why does the conservative narrative still capture Christians' imaginations like it does?
Well, that is a really complicated question that we could spend many years of episodes really doing
so.
justice to. But
Yes.
so let me say something that I think is true and useful, but it's certainly not the whole story.
Okay.
One way to understand the last couple of 100 years of history is to say that this thing called modernity emerged. And let me describe modernity as this sort of overlapping Venn diagrams of capitalism, this new form of measuring value, and especially based on industrial production. And then it's overlapping with the Enlightenment. Let's say that's a way of putting a certain kind of human analytical thinking as the primary way of thinking, as opposed to earlier ways of thinking that might have privileged tradition or authority figures and so on. And colonialism, the idea that certain nations were superior and could rule over and exploit other nations. Now, we might challenge some of those ideas today, but those three circles, plus some others, create a Venn diagram, and there's a huge space that overlaps with those three. And one way to say it is wherever that modernity way of thinking, wherever it went, religion declined. It didn't matter which religion. Now, the Christian religion profited in the short run because it was able to offer people a set of advantages to colonialism. For example, if the British are colonizing you, and it's not a happy life for you if you're colonized, but if they let you join their religion, you get an inside track. You become sort of the elite of the colonized. And if you're Muslim and a Muslim empire conquers you, if you're an indigenous person and a Muslim empire conquers you and you become a Muslim, you get an inside track with the new dominating power. And the same would be true with Hinduism or whatever the religion. But Christianity, in its Catholic and Protestant forms, did most of the colonizing.
Mm-hmm.
So this produced a short-term gain. But interestingly, right about the time colonialism peaks, Christianity in Europe begins to decline. And Christianity, especially in terms of active church attendance, is certainly now declining in the United States too. When you take away immigrants, and the irony is that they're taking away immigrants, and it was largely immigrants that were keeping the numbers up in many of our churches. So wherever modernity goes, it seems to reduce faith. It produces consumers rather than believers, and some consumers are believing consumers, but the consuming consumes the belief. It becomes the ultimate value. And so what I think we're in this liminal space, to use a good term, we're in this period where a postmodern, postmodernist, post-colonial, post-enlightenment, and post-capitalist exploration of faith has not yet emerged. So what we could say is progressive Christianity is a form of Christianity that still thinks it has a ways to go. It still thinks there's progress to be made, and that can be a good thing. But what the alternative looks like, I don't think has shown up, at least not very substantially and not very sustainably. There have been beautiful experiments, but we still have a long way to go. But let me use just an analogy from history. There was this fellow in Europe named Jan Hus, over a generation before Martin Luther, said just about everything Martin Luther would say, but the time wasn't ripe yet for those ideas to take hold. And I think we have many of the early Jan Hus-like examples of imagination and attempt at moving in that direction. I don't think we're there yet. And that, again, calls for imagination, because if what I just said has any validity to it, the hymns and the liturgies and the prayers and the other spiritual expressions of that new way of being Christian, they'll be like a renaissance. It'll be like new art forms. yeah, we haven't got there yet, but I think we will. I think it's inevitable that will emerge.
Yeah. One of the topics I started this podcast on was on the deconstruction movement. People
Yes.
seem to have the God that they experience doesn't seem
Yes.
to match the God that they learned about in church.
Yes. Yes.
And I spent, the last 2.5 years talking about that. And now I want to talk about reconstruction,
Yes.
because I think it's time. I think I was able to kind of identify something, that we haven't recontextualized God for the modern world.
Exactly.
We're still using like this Aquinas medieval,
Yes. Yes.
like Copernicus told us that we weren't the center of the universe, and I don't think that we've applied that theologically yet.
That's a great way to say it. We haven't caught up to Copernicus. We certainly haven't caught up to Darwin. We certainly haven't caught up to Einstein. Yeah, we've got a lot of catching up to do, and that's what needs to happen. Yes, and in some ways, you're explaining part of what I'm grappling with in this new book and the trilogy that it's part of, because. It traces this crew of people who are establishing a permanent community on Mars, and once they get there, 50 plus million miles from the Earth, with Earth's history looking like a dismal failure, and therefore Earth's religions looking like a dismal failure. If you were in that situation and you had to start over again, what would you do? And that becomes kind of a predicament you can put yourself in imaginatively that maybe helps us see our own predicament here and now.
I like that. That's a similar question that I will pose someone I'm in direction with, and say, if you were to just erase all of the downloaded material in your brain about God, and just look around you, what kind of God do you think would have made all this?
Yes.
And that's a hard thing because we have all these built in.
Yes.
Like, you have to believe, behave, and all these things in order to belong.
Yes.
And it's hard to recontextualize those and still maintain a sense of belonging to people who are not going through that journey at the same time.
Yes. Yes.
So,
it's funny. I spent 24 years of my life as a pastor, and many of the years since continuing in this work of studying and teaching the Bible. And one of the assumptions I was given is that there is one view of God in the Bible. But as a pastor and preacher, I just kept thinking, these views aren't all reconcilable. These views are in contrast. Some of these people think that if you marry a foreign wife of another religion, you should divorce her. And others think, no, if you were to marry a foreign wife, she might become the mother of the next King David, so she could be really important, and our diversity would be an asset to us. And I started just noticing, if you wanted an obvious example, in the book of Job, we have a sort of drama with different characters who have very different views of God. And at the end of the day, God kind of says, yeah, none of you really understand me, and in fact, you could even make a case that in the first few chapters where God gives a long soliloquy at the end, God says one thing and at the end kind of contradicts that. So if we were to see that the Bible is a book that invites us into imagining what God is like, that's the first thing I'd say. Second thing I'd say is, when you think about the church's creeds, there's a way of being faithful to the creeds of the church that is unfaithful to the creeds of the church. And here's what I mean. If people in the 4th or 5th century got together and got their best thinkers together and tried to come up with statements of what they stand for that really address the issues of today for them. And here we are, 1,000 years later, and we're reciting their words. Well, yes, we're being faithful to their words, but maybe we're being unfaithful to their example because we are not getting people together to address the critical issues of our day. Mm-hmm. And And again, I'm not dissing the creeds. I'm just saying probably the best way to respond to be faithful to the creeds is to not only take their words seriously, but also take their example seriously and continue the work.
Yeah, I dove into some of not just the creeds themselves, but kind of the political reasons why they were written. Where the Rome had just assumed Christianity as the national religion, but there was so diverse of beliefs and communities, and they needed uniformity. And
Yes.
so it's like we got to get everybody together and figure out what we're going to believe. We need this thing to be uniform for empire's sake.
Yes.
And I noticed the weakness of that, but also it's brought a lot of good at the same time. Is there what strengths comes out of that creedal form, and what are the limitations in a modern world of that?
Yes. Well, here's the downside. To get people to repeat the words of an authority figure, that's one of the greatest ways to induce authoritarianism. So a powerful person says, I had the biggest crowd in history. And people count the number of people in the crowd and they say, no, it wasn't even close to the biggest crowd in history. But the dictator knows if he can get people to repeat his lie, that means that they're more afraid of him than they are of their own conscience. And it means that, in a certain sense, they have totally sold out to him. So authority figures often do this. They barrage you with lies so that you just give up on knowing what the truth is, and so that you'll just echo whatever they say because it's the path of least resistance, right? This is how you wear people down. So that's a downside of it. But here's the problem. We need ways to bring about, maybe not uniformity, but we need ways to bring about conviviality, the ability of people to live peacefully together, or even better than conviviality, collaboration, the ability to work together to try to solve the problems of the common good. And the question is, I think a list of beliefs is a very good way to build uniformity. I don't think it's the best way to build conviviality or to build collaboration. And I think that comes from something else. And that's one of the things I think we have to figure out as we move forward. I'll just say, to me, I just tend to think that Jesus was right. And when someone asked him what the great commandment was, he didn't say, believe this and this and this. He said, love God, love your neighbor. And I think the greatest way to build conviviality and collaboration is by teaching people what deserves their love, and in not what they ought to love, but actually inspiring them and giving them permission and helping them fall in love with it. So, because what you love, you take care of, and you follow in a certain sense.
Yeah. Oh, recontextualizing God, I think we can revisit the creeds and see the good that's there, but also the limitations that are there. I don't think we need to necessarily abandon creeds altogether, because there is some good there that
Yes.
that has carried through for a long time. But it seems as though we've written modern day creeds that don't necessarily pay homage to the ancient creeds. If you look at the fundamentalist reactions
Yes.
of the 1920s, they said, here's the 5 things, and then I think they added a 6th one later. Here's the 5 things that you have to, non-negotiable to be a Christian, kind of a thing.
Yes.
And they had nothing to do with the ancient creeds.
Yes. So this points out to me a really fascinating story, a true story, that during the apartheid years in South Africa, a group of black and colored, and then they were joined by some white Dutch, all these were Dutch Reformed theologians, got together and developed a statement called the Belhar Confession. And this confession is the first official church statement in the history of Christianity that says that racism is a sin.
Wow.
And And what happened in recent years, like recent meaning the last 15 year or 20 years at most, the Presbyterian Church in the United States and the Reformed Church in America in the United States, and maybe some others too, accepted the Belhar Confession on an equal level as the documents from the 16th century that were their sort of foundational documents. And what to me, what was brilliant about that is that what it said is that we are not just a creedal people who believe the creeds of the past. We keep learning and we keep trying to articulate what we're learning as time goes on. And you think it is a pretty sad religion that will excommunicate you for not agreeing with this or that element of the creed, but will not excommunicate you for being a racist or a pedophile or a chauvinist or a nationalist, right? So, yeah.
Wow, I did not know that story at all. But that is a perfect example of recontextualizing the faith.
Yes.
In the modern day. Because so many of our theologies, I mean, they're based in a world where the earth is the center of the universe and the universe is just as small as the Milky Way. It's very human-centric. It's very earth-centric. Even the doctrine of the return of Christ, Jesus is coming back to earth to set up the rule and reign of God. And then you look at, the Laniakea cosmological address of where our Milky Way fits in the grand cosmos, and you're like, really? He's just going to come back to that little dot there and set up the rule and reign of God? How do we recontextualize when we feel so far behind in some of these things? What do we do with some of these theologies that are very earth and human-centric that have been core to the faith?
Well, this is where if this line of thought interests you and others, a great resource to you could be a Catholic theologian of the 20th century named Thomas Berry. And Thomas Berry, in fact, late in his life, he didn't like being called a theologian because he felt the whole project of Western theology had distracted people from the earth and our current actual life. And what it did is it made eternity matter and history and time didn't matter. And he felt that created the ecological crisis that we're facing and in many ways exacerbated religious violence because God's going to torture people and send them to hell. Why don't we just start that work a little bit early, right? So he felt there was something seriously wrong with the story as we were telling it. And he talked about the need for a new universe story that paid attention to what we've learned about science in recent centuries. And he, of course, was especially interested in astronomy and, sort of cosmogenesis and that sort of thing. But today, I think we'd also have to add, we've got to pay attention to what we've learned about evolution and especially human evolution. And we have to pay attention to what we know about brain science and the human nervous system. And so many people are afraid of that. It's terrifying for them. I think it's so exciting. I think this, if there's a future for faith, that's what the future requires. And Thomas Berry was saying this, Teilhard de Chardin, another Catholic theologian, was saying this 100 years ago. Yeah. And Thomas Berry was saying it 50 years ago. So,
yeah, I know a little bit of Teilhard's work. He's so hard to read.
He is.
He's so monolithic of a thinker. He's really hard to dive into. But when you learn the concepts that he was throwing around way back when, it's like, this is the stuff we need to be paying attention to right here.
And thank God, Thomas Berry, in many ways, translated Teilhard into a more accessible framework and took the next steps with Teilhard. And equally good, we have living people now, people like Sister Ilia Delio, a Franciscan nun. And she's wonderful. She's taking that work and making it more accessible to people today.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like we do have a lot of work to do. But one thing that I am trying to personally do, growing up, you have a very magical world and God does things when you behave certain ways. Then you grow up, you experience tragedy. It doesn't work out the way you think it is. And there is like a unenchanted world that you live in, and cynicism takes over,
Yes.
and you're not sure what's true and how God works. And um, I'm I spent a lot of years there after
Yes.
many tragedies, raising a disabled son who's now 21, losing a child, losing my dad. Just going through lots of tragedy tends to suck the magic out of your world.
Yes. Yes.
But I want to re-enchant my world without leaning into old superstitions.
Yes. Yes.
How
Yes.
do we
Yes.
do this?
Yes. Yes. Tom, if I can, I don't know anything about your son and your story with him. So, but I wonder if I could use that example as something that could be of help to you and other folks who are listening, by telling you a quick story of magic for me, but it almost is the flip side of what you're talking about and have experienced. My last day of being a pastor was in January of 2006, and the new pastor came, and we had my send off. And the following a day or two later, my wife and I were leaving for a trip around the world because I'd been having all these invitations to speak, and so we organized them that I'd be gone for I forget 5 weeks or 7 weeks, whatever it was. So the next Sunday, I was in Sydney, Australia. And I didn't have any duties that day, so we just took the day off. We're walking around Sydney. And for folks who've been to Sydney, they probably will remember the Rocks. It's a neighborhood with big rocks, but where all these little funky shops and restaurants are. So we were just walking around. And it was sort of an emotional day. My first Sunday, not a pastor, didn't go to church. And I hear some jazz music playing, and I love music and I love jazz. So we followed our ears to a little courtyard, and a band was playing. Turned out it was an American band visiting there playing jazz. And people started dancing to the music. And I looked and I saw at the front of the stage a little boy who looked to be about 8 years old. And you could just tell by his appearance that he was a kid with special needs. And he was just lost in the music. And in fact, he put his fist up to his mouth, and then with his fingers, he was like playing playing the trumpet on his hand, and he was just into the music. And I realized that his parents were sitting at the table next to me, and they were arguing, should we go get him? He's embarrassing himself, and I could just feel their pain, that he, and finally, I can't remember, one of them said to the other, just let him be. He's happy, And so right about that moment, two of the musicians on the stage looked down and saw him. And first, the sax player jumped off the stage and stood next to him playing. And then the trumpet player jumped off the stage and stood next to him playing. And his eyes were still closed. But when he opened his eyes and saw that he was now literally part of the band because they came to him, he had this look of ecstasy on his face, and the joy. He started just jumping up and down. He was like so much energy in his body, he couldn't contain it. And it was this super happy moment. And I looked over at his parents, and of course, tears are coming down their face because they couldn't have imagined as good an outcome that for those few moments, he was lifted up into something. And when the song ended, everybody applauded. And by then, most of the people in the crowd saw what had happened. It was just an incredible moment. But I think to myself, you saw the tragedy and you felt the pain, because for every wonderful moment like that, there are so many difficult, trying moments for the child and for you. And in a way that the child couldn't experience, the parents experience sadness for what the child is missing and will miss, and all of this that you understand better than anyone. But what struck me was it wasn't just the love of the musicians to include him. It was also the love of the crowd to acknowledge that and celebrate that. But it was also the joy that the parents got to see of that. And the irony is, if God felt real to me ever in my life, it was that moment. Mm-hmm. Even though it was not in church, it was this moment. There's something, and it was So the irony to me is a parent who's felt all the grief you felt, that is what makes you be a bearer of God, because that grief is so wrapped up with love and makes God seem both embodied and real. So, but what that requires is, just as you say, such a different understanding of God. God is not this organizer who planned all this out and had no regard for the pain it would cause, or dared to think that if he could, quote, get glory out of it, quote, he could, quote, get, quote, glory out of it, it was all fine. No, it's a very different understanding of God, who's much more, well, the irony for us as Christians is much more incarnated into the human experience.
Yeah,
Sorry to go on for so long.
That's a great story. And you remind me that, the kind of the central doctrine of the Christian faith is the incarnation, and how uncomfortable most Christians are with incarnation.
Yes.
Is a paradox. I think that is where the re-enchantment happens, is in the bodily experience of the now, in the moments. And
so, and in fact, it goes back to you in spiritual direction, telling people what's in front of you, and they say a tree. And, like a kind of enchantment that makes people think a miracle is wonderful and a tree is unimportant. I don't think, I mean, if somebody has that, I don't want to take it away from them if that's the best they have. But I'll tell you, I would rather have to live in the world we live in and then come to see that every tree is a miracle, and that every molecule of water is a miracle, and that, if folks are interested, there's a beautiful song about this. Oh my goodness, the author and name of the song will come to me in just a second. But it's about, it has the line, here it is, Holy Now is the name of the title. He says, I used to believe that there was this miracle that happened there, this miracle that happened there, but now everything's a miracle. Everything's holy now. And that, to me, is where we need to, I don't want to say need to, but it's where many of us end up when we go through these disillusionments. And it turns out to be actually a better place. I think we have to qualitatively say.
Yes. Regardless of what our nervous system thinks about past traumas, the understanding and capacity to see that comes with it is both a burden and the gift at the same time.
Yeah.
And that one's hard to communicate to people. But re-enchanting the world without leaning into old superstitions that's been my task as of late.
I love that. And of course, there are so many poets that help us with that, because it seems to me the best poetry comes from those moments where someone is looking at a wheelbarrow in the rain, or looking at the tall branches of a tree, or looking at a vase with some cuttings that were put in and noticing how roots have come out of the cuttings. Those moments where people say, this is amazing. I have to pause. Like looking at the burning bush. This is a burning bush. I have to pause and see the gloria in this simple.
Yeah. Well, let's see, when you look at all the regression happening right now, which is the most alarming to you? One end of the question. Second end is, and how do you find and hold on to hope in the midst of it?
Yeah. Well, ironically, the more I open my eyes to the regression, the less it's all alarming, but it's not surprising, I guess is what I would say. It's like, of course, this is what people would do. People have been shaped by a lifetime of TV commercials and magazine commercials, and really everything we watch on television is sponsored by a company. And even when we go online, the reason the internet is free is because people can gain information that will help them market to us. Of course, our value system would be screwed up. We have lived in, it wasn't a socialist political totalitarianism. it was a capitalist, democratic totalitarianism. In other words, we accepted it willingly. And so that regression just seems so utterly predictable. I suppose my regret, what alarms me, is how blithely the church went along with it and didn't even see the deeper shift in values that was going along. And what gives me hope? Well, I love what Václav Havel said. He said, hope is not the confidence that things will turn out as we wish, but hope is the conviction that some things are worth doing no matter how they turn out. And so what gives me hope is watching people say, I'm going to go on a search like you're on. How can I re-enchant the world without resorting to old superstition? Like, to me, that's deciding how you want to show up. And that is what inspires me and encourages me.
Well, thank you for helping me write my sermon for this coming Sunday. Thank you for writing, I guess, both of these books. So we've been able to talk about both of them.
Yes.
When you write the second one, we're definitely going to have you on, more to talk about. And thank you so much for just coming here and being so gracious and so wise. This has been a blessing.
Well, it's a blessing for me, as you can imagine, to get to meet and talk to people like you and think about the folks who are wise enough that they discovered your podcast. Please keep up the good work, and thanks for having me.
Thank you.